I'm Dana Perino.
And I'm Chris Stirewalt.
And here's what we'll tell you this hour. Our top headlines of the day. After a rough spell, Donald Trump looks to reset with a big speech and a new approach. How'd that go? Plus, are Democrats getting cocky? Team Hillary is looking at some red state real estate. Also, the RNC chairman's new edict for his party. Fall in line behind Trump or else. And the guy who cracked Watergate calls it corruption. What's the latest on allegations of pay-for-play against Hillary Clinton? And finally, the down-ballot effect on the United States Senate. The data dive will help you impress your friends with inside knowledge. Carl mentioned yesterday's bold move of the Republican candidate going to Gettysburg. We have a little bit from that. Let's take a look.
First, a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on all members of Congress. Second, a hiring freeze on all federal employees to reduce federal workforce through attrition, exempting military, public safety, and public health. Third, a requirement that for every new federal regulation, 2 existing regulations must be eliminated. Fourth, a 5-year ban on White House and congressional officials becoming lobbyists after they leave government service. Fifth, a lifetime ban on White House officials lobbying on behalf of a foreign government.
So that was the policy piece. And
there's a lot there that Republicans would feel very nice about.
In fact, Newt Gingrich tweeted that it was the most policy substantive reform since 1980. No, he was generous. He said since 1980 with a Ronald Reagan speech. But then as Carl Cameron was saying that Donald Trump
There were other things said. There were other things said.
We have a quick look at that.
It's my privilege to be here in Gettysburg, hallowed ground where so many lives were given. Every woman lied when they came forward to hurt my campaign. Total fabrication. All of these liars will be sued after the election is over.
So, Chris, here's the thing. So the Trump campaign is very frustrated with the media because it says it's not covering the substance. And that part wasn't written into the speech, but he couldn't help himself.
Woof. I mean, the Trump, what he gave, the idea to say, we're staking it all on the line. It's late in the game. We're going to Gettysburg. And by the way, Gettysburg's significant. People who believe that what we do matters in history and what people do matter in history. We think about Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain on the Little Round Top, swings the gate, turns back the charge, and prevents Robert E. Lee and the Army of the Northern Virginia driving further into Union territory, making opportunities to sue for peace. You can see how the 1864 election turns out differently. You can see how all of these things happen differently as a result of the courage and fortitude and preparation of one man, one unit, one place. It's amazing. American history.
It's and then the speech that Abraham Lincoln gave, it's engraved at the memorial.
There is, and I think I can say this without fear of rightful correction, the single greatest piece of political oratory in American history and in the history of the world would certainly argue for a very top spot.
All right, I won't argue.
And he did it in less than 3 minutes.
Okay.
And we can't do a segment about Senate races in 3 minutes, and Reagan did that. So by Trump going there, that's a bold statement that is claiming the birthright, the most valuable, sacred birthright of his party. And what I don't understand, his campaign was right to say, we're late, we're down, let's go. What are we going to do? Let's go to Gettysburg. Let's make the big claim. Let's claim Lincoln. Let's go to the place. Why would you talk about the sex stuff?
Well,
why would you talk about that? I do not understand that.
It didn't. I don't think it necessarily helped him. And if you look at the ABC poll that came out this morning, I think we have a look at that. This is a poll that came out today showing Hillary Clinton up 12 points over Donald Trump. And
that's
yet,
a lot of points.
That's a lot of points. I want to also show you the halftime report average.
A little perspective.
Because it shows a much closer race than that. So I wanted to ask you, given what Carl Cameron was saying, that Donald Trump is within the margin of error of several of these places, he's still in the hunt, this is not over yet. How much does a poll like the ABC poll matter at this point?
Well, I mean, the poll matters in the sense that when you put it into that average, when you make our delicious Slim Jim of polling, it's balanced off by other polls that say Trump is. There's actually one poll, which is adorable, that has Trump winning right now when every other poll, I think it's the IBD poll, every other poll says he's down. Is he down 6? Is he down 12? Is he down 4?
I think it was Rasmussen and
well,
IBD
we don't even talk about that.
We don't.
We don't
okay,
even talk
other shows
about
might.
That. That's not.
But we won't do it here.
Well, we just want to deal with the real stuff.
So your average shows them about a 6-point difference.
At about a little more than 6 points down. I think one of the things that creates the misunderstandings about polling, though, and I hear this all the time, a person I love, a person to whom I'm related, that I had a telephone conversation with today.
You know who you are. Who
said, and you know who you are, JNS, that said to me, well, maybe it's off and maybe it's all wrong, and things like that. They had sampled more Democrats in that than Republicans. Well, of course they sampled more Democrats. There ended up being more Democrats and Republicans in the samples. You know why?
Because there are more Democrats and Republicans.
Not just because there's more Democrats and Republicans in America, but also, daggone it, and this is what makes me so mad, we don't screen for whether there's Democrats or Republicans in the sample. That's not a question that pollsters ask. We never ask that question. We ask how you're voting, and then at the end we say, okay, do you consider yourself a Republican or a Democrat? The better a Democrat's doing, the more people consider themselves Democrats. The better a Republican's doing, the more people consider themselves Republicans, because you get melt off from the middle. And Hillary Clinton is having a good run, Donald Trump's having a bad run, so it wouldn't be surprising that there's more Democrats.
If you, at this point, though, would you look at national polls or state polls if you were looking? Because he's got, as Carl was saying, Donald Trump's going to be in Florida and really work in that state. She's going to be in North Carolina. Those are the states that they're obviously worried about.
You could do it either way. I could preach it round or I could preach it flat. You could say that do the whole country. You could say do the whole country, and it's a big enough margin right now that you say, well, this will take care of itself underneath. Or you could just be lazy and you could pick one state and say, or actually you could pick one county. I'll give you 2 counties.
Okay.
You could pick Hillsborough County, Florida.
Okay.
And you could pick Franklin County, Ohio. Tell me how they're voting. We'll be all good.
All right. It's interesting. Everybody should go Google those 2 counties right now. But coming up, our panel will join us. We are just a little over 2 weeks from the end of this campaign. And our election team, as we've been saying, works overtime, getting ready to bring you wall-to-wall coverage on that big night.
Do you make the same commitment that you will absolutely, sir, that you will absolutely accept the result of this election?
I will look at it at the time. I'm not looking at anything now. I'll look at it at the time. I will totally accept the results of this great and historic presidential election if I win. Michelle Obama gives a speech, and everyone loves it. It's fantastic. My wife, Melania, gives the exact same speech. And people get on her case.
People look at the Statue of Liberty and they see a proud symbol. Donald looks at the Statue of Liberty and sees a 4.
We will drain the swamp in Washington, D.C. and replace it with a new government of, by, and for the people.
There's a look at just a bit of what has been another wild week on the campaign trail. Let's bring in this week's panel of guests to talk about it and much more. Josh Crosshar, politics editor at National Journal, Rafi Williams, reporter at Circa.com, and Bill Galston, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, Wall Street Journal columnist, and former deputy assistant to Bill Clinton. I have to say, Bill, that Chris was quite surprised I was able to get you to come.
I wondered how bad your agent is that you couldn't, that you, distinguished scholar, Brookings Institution, and all of that couldn't do better than this. But we're glad you're here.
Who has an agent?
Good point. Josh,
I do my own booking. You see what happens.
Well, we are honored to have you here. I've been a fan of yours for years. Of course, I read everything you write too, Josh. Can you sum up the week for me, where we stand 2 weeks to go?
It was a bad week for Donald Trump, and it just seems like this was the week where he not only did he lose, he's losing it by double digits in most of the national polls, but the enthusiasm by raising the question of the legitimacy of the election. There are a lot of people who supported him that may not even show up at the polls, and there was a new ABC Washington Post poll that came out today that suggested that the enthusiasm of Trump voters is actually below the enthusiasm of Hillary Clinton voters. And that not only is a big red flag for Donald Trump, it's a big red flag for Republican Senate candidates, Republican House candidates.
Don't steal the later segments. Don't steal the later segments, Josh. This is important.
What do you hear out there, Rafi?
I mean, it's a struggle, because when Trump goes out there and questions how good the elections are, if they're rigged or not, he then forces Republican secretaries of state, people who have come out and support him, to then say, no, our elections are safe, what Trump is saying is wrong. And so he then is splitting the party that he needs to put together. I mean, he's sitting there, I think only 80% of Republicans plan on voting for him. That's a troubling stat.
Let me ask you something, Bill, and then we'll let you ask a question, but I'm hogging the time
I'm
at the moment.
overrated.
We asked a question earlier, hypothetically. Do you think that the Clintons are getting a little too cocky, getting a little ahead of themselves, or looking to expand the map, sending people to Arizona and Georgia, or is that realistic for them?
I'm not sure that Georgia is realistic. I think Arizona may well be.
Yep.
And so I don't think it's crazy. If they have the money to do that, while at the same time doing what's necessary to make sure they win the Pennsylvanias of this world, then why not? And I think they do have the money based on everything we've been reading and hearing. So I think it's a good move.
Swing state Texas, you buy that? I'm not buying it.
I don't buy that. There haven't been a whole lot of reputable polling from some of these Republican states.
Stank polling is what they have.
But like the big question right now is Hillary Clinton, if she wins, does she get a mandate? And to me, I'm looking at
Well, she has a mandate to be not Donald Trump.
She does.
That's the only mandate that she's running for right now, right?
And that's the mandate she's going to get. The big
Which she will satisfy on, if she wins, she satisfies on Election Day.
Well, the big question I'm going to be looking at is, do Hispanic voters show up in a state like Arizona? It's not whether she wins Arizona or not. Does she mobilize the types of groups that Obama was able to do so successfully in 2008 and 2012? If she just wins Arizona because Republicans stayed home and Donald Trump shot himself in the foot, I don't think that's as much of a mandate.
Right, Ravi, the Hispanic turnout has not been, we've seen poll after poll. We were waiting for this giant wave of Hispanic turnout. We were waiting for the registrations, and it hasn't materialized so far.
No, it hasn't. But what you're going to see, and I think this is why it's a good play for Clinton to make plays in Arizona and Texas, is because this is the beginning of starting to mobilize these voters that have been ignored for so long. They're not used to having people talk to them, having people want to reach out to them, get them to the polls. So you're conditioning them to get in the sense of, you show up for elections, Democrats are going to fight for you for elections. And that's the benefit of it for the Democrats. It's not just for Hillary Clinton this cycle, it's going to pay dividends moving forward as well.
I thought you were a Republican.
I am, but a smart play is a smart play. Look, if Republicans were in this
position,
position...
on the other foot, and we could make inroads into California, we would do it, right?
Or we started spending big money in Michigan or getting them out, you know?
All right, coming up, Trump's speech at Gettysburg comes at a time when a civil war may be breaking out within his own party, with the Democrats not far behind. One of the panelists wrote about exactly this issue, and he'll fill us in. That's next. We're back. That was RNC Chair Reince Priebus on a Sunday show this morning. And Donald Trump is hurt by a lack of party loyalty. That's according to our latest Fox News poll. Only 80% of Republicans back him. 87% of Democrats support Clinton. Bill Galston wrote about a three-headed GOP after Donald Trump. And fortunately for us, we have him here to talk about that. What do you mean by a three-headed GOP?
Well, I stepped back from the Republican Party, which, as everybody knows, is not my party, which made it a lot easier to step back, I guess. And I just took a look at the different pieces of the Republican Party when it comes to economics.
Okay.
And there were three. There is the traditional corporate establishment wing of the Republican Party. There's the small business, small town wing, the National Federation of Independent Business wing, if you will. And then we have this very large white working class constituency that's neither one nor the other. And when you look at the economic policies that those three different pieces of the party advocate and want, it's impossible to put them together into a single coherent economic agenda. And so the Republican Party, after this election, if Mr. Trump loses, which I think is a very good bet at this point, is going to have to sort this out. And I don't think they have the choice of ducking it the way they ducked after 2012.
But now, Josh, the Democrats are not wholly unified either. Leading like this makes it easier. Hillary Clinton can say, I'm campaigning for Republican votes, I'm campaigning for Democratic votes, I'm campaigning for all the votes. If she does win, how did she put that coalition together, and how many WikiLeaks is she going to have stuffed up her nose?
Well, she may need to worry about more leaks once she becomes president, rather than what's happening in the campaign. But, you know, the Democratic Party has similar divisions as the Republican Party, as we saw during the primary. Bernie Sanders got about the same percentage of the primary vote on the Democratic side as Donald Trump did on the Republican side, except there were 17 Republican candidates, and you just had 2, or if you count Martin O'Malley, 3 on the Democratic side.
Lincoln Chafee, thanks for nothing, metric system.
Jim Webb, okay. But you know, the big challenge challenge is for the Republicans is they're not in power. I mean, if you had a Republican president, you could really put pressure on these internal conflicts in the Democratic coalition. When you're not in charge, all of a sudden the pressure's on you. And as Bill was just describing, you don't just have two divides in the party. You've got the Trump side of the party, the Ryan side of the party, and the Bush side of the party. And I think it could be the traditional donor establishment wing of the party, as Bill really outlined specifically, that could be on the outside looking in after the election.
Ravi, one of the things that the Republicans are dealing with, you would not have guessed 2 years ago that both the Republican and Democratic nominees would be opposed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the expansion of free trade. But they are. You would not have guessed that both the Republican and Democratic nominees would be out speaking against the merger between American Telephone and Telegraph and who do they want to buy?
Time Warner.
Time Warner.
News quiz.
That merger. Well, it's not like I work in television. That they would be against, that Hillary Clinton would sound more favorable about that merger than Donald Trump. So we are seeing something of that. The Chamber of Commerce establishmentarian Republican wing not really having a lot of voice.
Well, I think that they have more voice than you realize. I think when you talk about, look at the Senate primaries and who came out of that, they're mostly establishment-friendly Republicans that are coming out of that and that are running relatively strong races ahead of Donald Trump in most cases. And I think that you can also point and say, look, Donald Trump is not a traditional Republican. He's not somebody who's been a die-on-the-wool Republican, so it's not our brand. That's an aberration. That's something that just happened this year.
Can they really do that, though, Bill?
I don't think so. And here's why. The Republican Party acquired the white working class constituency at a low, low bargain price. And now the bill has come due. It is a huge share of the Republican base. And they're not going away. And now that they've found a voice, and now that they know pretty clearly exactly what it is they want out of the party, I really think that it's an issue now that the party leadership, such as it is going to have to confront frontally.
Well, I think people.
Well, I want to ask Jack one thing. Did you ever imagine that the next William Jennings Bryan would hail from Manhattan and not the Plains? Is that what we're looking at here?
Queens.
We all think
Queens. That's a big difference.
Quite so.
No.
Jamaica Queens.
It's the biggest surprise, obviously. Trump was never anticipated to be the nominee. We thought Ted Cruz was going to really tap into that anti-establishment angst. He didn't, and now Trump has kind of implemented his own version of this populism.
But is this something that stays, as Bill points out, Ravi makes one case, Bill makes another. In the case of the Democrats with William Jennings Bryan, it stayed and stayed and stayed. That populism, the agrarian revolt stayed with the Democratic Party for a long time.
I think it will, because Trump is trying to start a TV network perhaps, or trying to expand his message after this election. So that's going to be a big thing to watch. The other thing is, there were a lot of people who were Jeb voters, who were establishment Republicans that I interviewed at Trump rallies that said the things along the lines of, I never heard this stuff before, but I like it. And that's the real worry, that he won a lot of moderate Republicans in the primaries. They could become Trump voters.
Please.
And the only group we haven't talked about is young people, and millennials are the largest generation. And
say something, millennial.
I guess for the lulz.
Okay.
Say something in millennial.
All right, we've got much more, as I'll tell you what continues. But while we take this short break, here's what you need to do, America. Go to foxnews.com/PS podcast. You should listen. You should subscribe. It's delightful and no calories. And you can also sign up for the Fox News Halftime Report. Daggone it, it's so good. I write it. You'll love it. It's free, so it's worth every penny. It's time for the I'll Tell You What Data Dive.
Can't wait.
All right, as we like to do each week, let's begin with the averages. Last week's halftime report average is 47-39. Hillary Clinton winning by 8 points, I think that says. Let's look at this week. How is it now? Hillary Clinton 46, Donald Trump 39.6, so doing a little better, but still down 6.4 points. But what we want to talk about this week is we want to talk about down ballot consequences when the top of the ticket is not doing so hot. So let's look right now at the current balance of power in the United States Senate. The red seats are the Republicans, by the way.
Oh, okay.
All right, so that's how you see it. It's 54 Republicans, 46 Democrats, and they're loving it, and that's what they did in 2014. But really in this math, there's only 34 seats that are up for election because the rest of them, they do it in thirds, but of those seats, let's look at what really matters. What are the seats that really matter? And the seats that you see there in yellow or in lighter red color, lighter blue or lighter red colors, are the states that we're really watching. Those are the states, of course, that really matter. And how's that going to go? And how will Donald Trump's performance at the top of the ticket affect Republicans as they run? Well, if I knew that, I could have saved Mitch McConnell about $200 million. But we can take some guesses based on history.
Okay.
So let's look here at the Senate composition prior to the 2012 election. How was it? It was the Republicans had 47 seats, Democrats had 53. Then they had the election, and then what happened? And move the giant swirly graphic, and it says, uh-oh, for the Republicans, they're now down 10 seats at 45, 55. That's what the Republicans are worried about. They're worried
it'll happen again.
That it'll be like that again. There'll be a high correlation that about as well as Donald Trump does will be about as well as the Senate candidates do, and that the trickle-down effect goes through. But is that always the case? Is that always the truth? Is that what always happens?
Tell me.
Let's look at what happened in 1984, which was the worst rout in modern electoral history. Sorry, Bill. At the pre-1984 election, the Republicans were doing quite well already. They had 55 seats. Then what happened? Oh, they lost seats. That's weird. The Republicans actually lost seats when they won their most crushing presidential victory.
Why?
I don't know. Maybe it's different in years when it's a little closer. Can we see 1996 when the Republicans got skunked but not brutalized? Okay, so they had 53 seats going into the election. How'd they do coming out?
I like this little swirly thing.
It's so swirly. It's the swirliest.
Anticipation.
Well, look at that. The party that lost the presidential election, again, gaining seats in the Senate. What's up with that, you might like to know?
I would like to know.
I'm going to tell you right now. Let's go back. Let's look at the current balance of power again. So if what happens this year is like what happened in 2012, here's what would happen to the Republicans if they did about 4 points worse. The Senate candidates in 2012 did, on average, 4 points worse than Mitt Romney. They would get destroyed. They would lose 11 seats in the United States Senate if the same model held from 2012 to this time. But what if it was like 1996 when Bob Dole lost, but not by everything? Well, going into that election, or coming out of that election, the Republicans would lose 3 seats.
Okay.
So my point here is this, and I'm glad we have this panel, but Josh, don't shame me. Don't shame me. I think, and the data that I've looked at backs it up, in years where you have a lopsided loss, ticket splitting goes way up. And I looked at years going back to 1972, and ticket splitting goes way up in those years. Could I be right here that the Republicans aren't necessarily tethered to Donald Trump's performance in such a high degree?
Yes, you may be right, but here's the one big caveat.
Okay.
In the last 15 years or so, people have looked at their party identification and tended to cast more straight ticket ballots post-96, right? So you've actually seen a lot of wave elections in the last 6 elections. 06, Democrats won control. 08, Democrats have a huge year.
I knew he was going to bring this up.
10 and 14, great years for Republicans. It's because people tend to look at their party and vote across the ballot the same way. Trump is such a unique phenomenon, though. I think you're right, Chris, that 96 might actually be the better parallel.
Bill, is it possible that in terms of, we talk about strategic voting, that there are voters who say, well, look, I'm going to vote for Hillary at the top of the ticket, but I'd like, and this is what you saw very explicitly in 1996, Republicans said, don't give her a blank check. Is that something, do you think, that is, from a social psychological point of view, is there enough of that sentiment out there to make a difference?
There may be.
Okay.
I mean, I've spent some time trying to put myself into the head of distressed and cross-pressured moderate Republicans.
Right.
Many of whom, it is possible, have never cast a vote for a Democrat for president in their entire lives, but are going to do it this time. I would think that that kind of person would want to lean in the other direction when it comes to a Senate race, particularly if there's a perfectly respectable Republican incumbent in the race. Then the question becomes, what is the presidential margin in that state?
Right.
Because if the margins widen from 5 or 7% to 10 or 12%, then I don't think there can be enough ticket splitting.
But we do see, and we do see in some blowout years, ticket splitting go to 20 points, 22 points, 23 points.
Really?
It does, when things get bonkers, when it gets like 84, then you see this radical decoupling. But that's not the kind of year we're looking at, right?
Right.
And, well, I was going to mention to Rafi, a lot of the Senate candidates of the Republicans that are running, the incumbents, They've run pretty good races. If you look at Rob Portman in Ohio, that's a really good example. He localized that race. It's all about Ohio.
It's like Ted Strickland's been campaigning in Kentucky.
And I also think that Kelly Ayotte has tried to do that in New Hampshire. That might be tougher. But the race that I've been interested in, I don't know if you could comment or I'll open it to the table, is the race in Indiana, the Senate race, because you have Young versus Bai, and it's looks like Young might be able to pull that out.
And we should say, for the purposes of America, this is the seat that is Dan Coates, the Republican who came in 2010, only came back in 2010, opted to retire, and so the seat's open.
Right. Well, I mean, I think what you're seeing, especially this week with reports from the AP that Bai didn't even live in Indiana.
He didn't even know his address.
Right. I mean, he wasn't.
He knew one of the words in his address.
And when he came home, he stayed in hotels. So he was never in Indiana, and he's been in lobby. So you have this narrative that works in Young's favor. Now,
a piece, you can see how the 1864 election turns out differently. You can see how all of these things happen differently as a result of the courage and fortitude and preparation of one man, one unit, one place. It's amazing. American history.
And then the speech that Abraham Lincoln gave, it's engraved at the memorial.
There is, and I think I can say this without fear of rightful correction, the single greatest piece of political oratory in American history and in the history of the world would certainly argue for a very top spot.
All right, I won't argue.
And he did it in less than 3 minutes.
Okay.
And we can't do a segment about Senate races in 3 minutes, and Reagan did that. So by Trump going there, that's a bold statement that is claiming the birthright, the most valuable, sacred birthright of his party. And what I don't understand, his campaign was right to say, we're late, we're down, let's go. What are we going to do? Let's go to Gettysburg. Let's make the big claim. Let's claim Lincoln. Let's go to the place.
Welcome to Perino and Stirewalt. I'll tell you what, I'm Dana Perino.
And I'm Chris Stirewalt.
And here's what we'll tell you this hour. Our top headlines of the day. After a rough spell, Donald Trump looks to reset with a big speech and a new approach. How'd that go? Plus, are Democrats getting cocky? Team Hillary is looking at some red state real estate. Also, the RNC chairman's new edict for his party. Fall in line behind Trump or else. And the guy who cracked Watergate calls it corruption. What's the latest on allegations of pay-for-play against Hillary Clinton? And finally, the down-ballot effect on the United States Senate. The data dive will help you impress your friends with inside knowledge. Carl mentioned yesterday's bold move of the Republican candidate going to Gettysburg. We have a little bit from that. Let's take a look.
First, a constitutional amendment.
Why would you talk about the sex stuff?
Well,
why would you talk about that? I do not understand that.
It didn't. I don't think it necessarily helped him. And if you look at the ABC poll that came out this morning, I think we have a look at that. This is a poll that came out today showing Hillary Clinton up 12 points over Donald Trump. And
that's
yet,
a lot of points.
That's a lot of points. I want to also show you the halftime report average.
A little perspective.
Because it shows a much closer race than that. So I wanted to ask you, given what Carl Cameron was saying, that Donald Trump is within the margin of error of several of these places, he's still in the hunt, this is not over yet. How much does a poll like the ABC poll matter at this point?
Well, I mean, the poll matters in the sense that when you put it into that average, when you make our delicious Slim Jim of polling, it's balanced off by other polls that say Trump is. There's actually one poll, which is adorable, that has Trump winning right now when every other poll, I think it's the IBD poll, every other poll says he's down. Is he down 6? Is he down 12?
To impose term limits on all members of Congress. Second, a hiring freeze on all federal employees to reduce federal workforce through attrition, exempting military, public safety, and public health. Third, a requirement that for every new federal regulation, 2 existing regulations must be eliminated. Fourth, a 5-year ban on White House and congressional officials becoming lobbyists after they leave government service. Fifth, a lifetime ban on White House officials lobbying on behalf of a foreign government.
So that was the policy piece. And
there's a lot there that Republicans would feel very nice about.
In fact, Newt Gingrich tweeted that it was the most policy substantive reform since 1980. No, he was generous. He said since 1980 with a Ronald Reagan speech. But then as Carl Cameron was saying, that Donald Trump
There were other
upstaged
things
himself.
said. There were other things said.
We have a quick look at that.
It's my privilege to be here in Gettysburg, hallowed ground where so many lives were given. Every woman lied when they came forward to hurt my campaign. Total fabrication. All of these liars will be sued after the election is over.
So, Chris, here's the thing. So the Trump campaign is very frustrated with the media because it says it's not covering the substance. And that part wasn't written into the speech, but he couldn't help himself.
Woof. I mean, the Trump, what he gave, the idea to say, we're staking it all on the line. It's late in the game. We're going to Gettysburg. And by the way, Gettysburg's significant. People who believe that what we do matters in history and what people do matter in history. We think about Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain on the Little Round Top, swings the gate, turns back the charge, and prevents Robert E. Lee and the Army of the Northern Virginia driving further into Union territory, making opportunities to sue for